We are now joined by Treasurer Scott Morrison to talk about these economic growth figures. Treasurer, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we know you've made a dash from the chamber to join us, so we appreciate that. Look, just on these national accounts, they are much better than 3 months ago. 2.5% annual growth, 0.9% quarterly growth. The exports are the big driver here, the best export numbers in 15 years. You must be pretty happy that the Australian dollar has come down as much as it has.
Well, that's one of the automatic stabilisers in the system, and of course we also have very low levels of interest rates as well, which also provide good conditions going forward for business investment to improve in the future. I mean, in these national accounts figures, we've got strong household consumption, we've got strong exports, and that is compensating for the entirely predictable decline in business investment, not just in the mining sector, but more generally in the economy. And this consumption, this increase in demand both from overseas and within the household sector, that will lead down the track to creating the right conditions for business investment to come in as well. So the economy is going through a transition, David. I mean, I think all Australians understand that. This is what occurs when you move off the biggest investment boom in the mining sector the country's ever seen, with the highest terms of trade, the highest levels of commodity prices. And now the economy is diversifying, it's broadening, it's transitioning, and Australians are making that transition, and we're backing them to do it.
Would you like to see the Australian dollar, though, come down even further?
Well, that's not really something I speculate on. It'll be where it'll be. What I want to see is growth positive policies. We need a growth-friendly tax system. We need a growth-friendly innovation system, because that's how you drive jobs in the economy. I mean, we will deal with the set of circumstances that are before us. I mean, we can't control global issues. We can't control where the dollar goes, but we can control how we run the tax system. We can control the policies around innovation. We can work to control our expenditure to make our budget stronger and to improve our financial system through our response to the Financial Systems Inquiry, and of course drive microeconomic reform through our response to the Harper Inquiry. So we're going to focus on the things that we can focus on, and we'll deal with the circumstances just like all Australians do. They have to deal with the circumstances in front of them, and again, that's why we want to back them so strongly.
Now, your emphasis on growth is interesting when it comes to tax reform, innovation, your competition reforms. You keep stressing growth is what you're trying to do. Is that your approach on the budget as well? And is it more important to achieve growth than to achieve a budget surplus?
Well, it's always important to achieve growth, because that's what supports jobs, and that's what is most important. When someone has a job, they have a choice. When a family has jobs, they have choices. They can plan for their own future. They can save for their retirement. They can do the things that make them more independent financially. So growth is the most important thing in that context. But in terms of the budget, there are two things you have to do. You've got to control expenditure, and it was only a few months ago when expenditure to GDP was over 26%. Now, the budget forecast for this year is 25.9%, and we've been working steadily through the MyEFO process over recent months to make sure we're on track there, and we'll be making some announcements about that in the mid-year update. So you control expenditure and you have policies that drive growth. That's how you build revenue. You've got to increase what Australians are earning, what the country is earning. You don't deal with revenue by jacking up taxes. That's Labor's approach, not ours.
So are you signalling there that spending at 25.9% isn't going to increase any further under your watch?
Well, MyEFO is the time to update those numbers, and we'll continue down that process, and we'll make those announcements at that time.
All right, but you're sounding pretty confident that you've got it under control and want to keep it under control.
Well, look, this is the task. Now, you have to control expenditure. That's the first thing you've got to do in terms of getting your budget under control. Because if you just simply say, oh, well, you can raise taxes to cover over a multitude of spending sins, well, you know where that ends up? It ends up where we inherited from the Labor Party after their 6 years in office. I mean, that's the way they ran the budget, and they ran it off the road. Now, we've been getting it back on the road. I mean, over $60 billion worth of savings measures. There could be more, by the way, but the Labor Party continues to stand in the way of savings measures. I mean, they have outstanding commitments of almost $60 billion in terms of savings. They want to reverse savings that they're blocking, and then at the same time only coming up with some $5 billion to pay for it all. I mean, that's just sort of the fiscal recklessness we were used to them doing in government, and they've clearly learnt nothing in opposition. That's why they can't be trusted to return to the government benches.
On the revenue side, there are warnings again today about the iron ore price falling much further than was forecast back in the May budget. Is that a worry to you? Is that going to hit the bottom line?
Well, commodity prices have been falling, and on the terms of trade side of things, I mean, we've had about an 18% decline in that since the last election. And these two factors obviously weigh heavily on revenue estimates when you're putting these mid-year statements together. And so, you know, that is obviously an issue we'll continue to monitor closely, and closer to the release of MyEFO we'll have to crystallise an assumption around that. But that is obviously a variable that has an impact on the budget. But what you don't do with these types of things is you don't chase those things down the hole. They are the parameters of which you have very little control. What you do when you manage a budget is you focus on the things that you can control. And that's what we're doing, and then you work through the rest.
So if you're not going to chase that lost revenue down a hole, we are going to see a deficit worse than $35 billion.
Well, the MyEFO will set out where the budget's at that time. But as a government, what we're going to do every year, every day, is get about the task of returning the budget to balance and into surplus, to strengthen the budget every day. But we're going to do it in a way that is not going to undermine growth in the economy. We're going to do it in a way which I think ensures that our spending is fit for purpose. And that is the real rule across spending. I mean, there are measures that we're seeking to get through the Senate, particularly in the family tax benefit area, but there are others where the opposition has blocked us. And people talk about the crossbench. The crossbench would not be a consideration in these issues if the Labor Party actually were interested in doing things to assist the government fix the fiscal mess that they themselves created. So I hold the Labor Party to account for their failure to support the government in the savings measures that we're putting forward. And we could be doing even better than we are now, but they've decided to continue to wreck the budget from opposition.
Final question, Treasurer. Fairfax reports your predecessor, Joe Hockey, took a tax plan to Tony Abbott for a 15% GST, 20% company tax rate and a top marginal personal income tax rate of 40%. Have you looked at that proposal? Do you like the sound of it?
Well, the work that I did was to present the outcomes of the work that was done under Treasurer Hockey to provide information to the states and territories, which the states and territories were seeking on the various GST options. So that's the work that has been presented to the state treasurers. That's the work that I'm aware of, and that has been presented. And I've made reference to that in the Parliament and other press conferences. And the only other person who actually sought modelling done by Treasury off their own bat was actually Chris Bowen, and he has scenario 3 out there which he hasn't approved the release of any details on. Now that was an expansion of the GST, both its base and an increase in its rate. So I'd be very interested to know what scenario 1 and 2 was, and 4, 5, 6 up to 11.7, but he refuses to come clean on what his own modelling on a GST was.
But this modelling from Joe Hockey that he commissioned, you've obviously had a look at it.
What I said is we presented the impact of the various options to the states and territories. That was what they asked for. So there's no secret about that. I mean, I don't think there's anything terribly sensational about that at all. The states and territories sought that from Joe, and that work was done, and I presented it at the last meeting of state treasurers. So that was part of a process initiated by the states and territories. So I don't think there's any... But what we're looking for is a growth-friendly tax system. We're looking right across the board on taxes. I mean, when a coalition government seeks to improve the tax system, we do it by cutting taxes. And that's our goal here, to ensure that our tax system is growth friendly. And that's my goal in this exercise. And other goals are frankly subsidiary or irrelevant to that.
Treasurer Scott Morrison, we appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Thanks very much for that.
Thanks, David. Thanks for your time.